Hey everybody, I know I just did a video not more than an hour ago, but and this one isn't really meant for the general populace, but after watching a couple other videos from other YouTubers on the topic that you see here on the screen, the Starlink for RVs, I had some other ideas. Again, from like I'm an old nerd. I'm an old, like, hard school nerd from the 1980s, 1990s, back in those days that were the early days of the internet, the good old, the pioneer days of the internet, Oregon Trail. No, let's not go there. So I had a couple other ideas. I'm going to pull up my notepad. It's not on the screen here, but of sort of what I wanted to talk about. And now that the Starlink for RVs is available, I thought of some ideas that, probably not immediately, but probably over the next year, two, three, four, that could be incorporated into the next iteration routers that that Starlink's shipping out with the equipment, with the dishes. Um, so I made a couple notes here. I think. Well, let me start. There's a couple items. In my notes here, I wrote down behind the scenes bandwidth adaptable mesh networking, prioritization, and router to router Wi-Fi SSID sharing across participating routers. So you would have to turn on the feature. Participating routers within range of each other. So I guess sort of what I'm seeing is like in like popular RV locations around the country, like Quartzsite and different RV parks, the big festivals, anywhere where people who are RVers or van lifers or wherever they congregate. It could be anything from like an RV show to a very popular camping area. It could even be just a relatively small campground. Well, not small, but a decent sized campground where you may, at any given time, you may have two or three, four people within range of each other who are all using Starlink. So one of the biggest issues on the infrastructure side, and again, I'm going to go way nerdy now, but I listen to a lot of Elon and other people. But when it comes to the number of users that are able to connect to the Starlink satellites, and again, in any given area, with it, and they're all broken down into like grid squares or grid pentagons or whatever. Whenever a satellite's over that area, there's only a limited number of people that can be connected to that satellite again at any given time. And once that reaches capacity, as it grows, and I really think Starlink's going to grow massively, over the next few years, especially as more and more people go remote or move rural, even if they're not RV van lifer, you know, uh, type people, just people who are going to be moving out to remote properties. So, and there's a number of scenarios here. So, like I said, I mentioned places like Quartzsite, popular RV parks, but even if it's like a fixed RV or mobile home community or whatever, even if it's rural, even if it's fixed, you know, if if they're in range of each other, if there's like a mesh networking type capability, and the mesh doesn't have to take place within the router. Now, the router would have to be compatible or whatever, but if the mesh capability takes place within the dish itself, so, or the, dish on a stick, whatever. It's not really a dish anymore. I guess it's a square. It's a, rectangle on a stick. But if there's some kind of like a backhaul radio inside that, 5 gigahertz, whatever gigahertz it needs to be on or whatever, if there's some kind of like mesh backhaul that resides within the actual receiver itself, then people are going to have those outside. They're going to be on roofs. They're going to be, some of them will be mounted up on poles to get above like a tree line. You know, if they live within a tree line, they'll try to get it above that so they can get reception, which makes it even better, what I'm about to say, because if there's like some kind of backhaul radio in those, and they live within a community, if it does start to, if the connections to the satellites, to the actual Starlink satellites start to get congested, then one or two dishes within that community can do all the work, but then whoever's requesting it within that community, say there's 15 people in that community, and you know, it might be the bandwidth might be something as simple as a kid watching YouTube videos or Facebook videos to somebody streaming, you know, Netflix, or doing work or uploading or downloading files or connecting to it through a VPN or whatever. But you know, it would basically share the data within a local community. And I think if a feature like that was available, you know, neighbors who know each other have Starlink, they would say, hey, turn on that feature, you know, let's share this, you know, we can share bandwidth, we can, you know, if things get congested, you know, we're sort of much more guaranteed to get some kind of coverage if there's only 2 of our dishes connecting rather than 25 dishes all trying to connect to satellites individually and disparately. You know, maybe I'm not clearly. I mean, you know, really nerdy people might know what I'm saying, but you know, the average folks not going to. So that's sort of bandwidth adaptable mesh capability. So yeah, I mean, again, if it's done right, nobody in that community will even know that they're going through that. It would be invisible, you know, and then the logic and the intelligence within the backhaul mesh system would be smart enough to adapt. So if more bandwidth would be requested, then another neighbor's dish could kick on and connect and provide, you know, whatever bandwidth is needed. And then when it dips down, it would, you know, go back to, say, even one dish, 2 dishes. But at the same time, every dish would still be pinging the satellites. So like if and they would be monitoring the backhaul. So like if the backhaul went down for some reason, you know, they would be fully connected back on their own again. So there's so much behind that, and I'm not going to delve too deep into that. Prioritization would be more for like if you are the owner of the dish itself that's doing the labor, the grunt work, that has the best connection to the satellite. And that's another thing in the previous step, but whoever has the best connection within a community would be the one that's providing the bandwidth out to everybody else, you know. But the people on that particular router, so say me, I have mine up on a pole that's above the tree line, it has a perfect view of the northern sky, you know, maximum possible bandwidth, then I would be on the main node, and I would be prioritized. You know, my devices in my home or whatever would have priority over everybody else, and then whatever bandwidth was left over would go out to everybody else, and then on down the line. So that's all I'll say on that. Router to router, Wi-Fi SSID sharing. I don't even know if that's a thing. That might be a part of like the 802.11 standard that would have to be adapted, the mesh standard, because I know mesh, you can have multiple access points but the same SSID, and you can seamlessly roam across those. I mean, for example, I have some TP-Link mesh networks at home and at a couple other places that I manage, and they work great. But doing it on a wider basis and on an adaptable basis, on an ever-growing basis, in a mesh network that might come together desperately at public places like Quartzsite, in RV parks and and stuff. Since I'm talking about this based on the RV, Starlink for RV, there would have to be a lot of code and a lot of logic behind it to make that happen. So Wi-Fi SSID sharing would pretty much mean that, or the way I envisioned it when I wrote my note is that, say you were at a big park or a big gathering or something, you could literally walk down. You could have your own SSID set on your own unit, and it's active on that mesh network. You set up your dish when you get to that site, and you know it's connected or whatever. But then you can walk through that entire, site, that community, that wherever you are, and any router that you connect to, any of the neighboring routers would say, hey, hey, all you other routers, is this a valid SSID? And is this a valid password? So on and so forth. And it would basically create it would have to be multiple SSIDs. So your SSID, if you were part of the community, would be broadcast across the entire community of routers, and same for everybody else. So that may present some challenges. I don't, again, I'm not going to delve into the 802.11 standard or whatever, but I think that would be really cool, that if you could walk across like an entire community, and as long as your router and your RV is connected somewhere within that mesh, it would you would be able to connect to Wi-Fi across that entire community. So I think that would be really cool. So let me move on to my notes here. Backhaul community mesh radio is it would be located on the outside dish, so you wouldn't want it on the inside dish, because RVs, or some of them are pretty metal and stuff, so they wouldn't get very far between each other, and the sharing would be limited. So it would be best if the backhaul mesh would be located on the dish itself, and the outside dish would occasionally search for and connect to others, and when available, connect to other units. And then it would quietly behind the scenes and fairly share bandwidth across the entire potential network of dishes within range of one another. Yeah, so that's pretty much my thoughts on it. I mean, I'm just trying to get ahead of the curve here a little bit. I think there's some potentially good ideas. I don't know. I might be totally off base, but even within neighborhoods, like way down the road, like I said early in the video, even if it's like a rural community out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, like some of the places that Starlink already has service, instead of having 4, 5, 6, 10, 25 dishes that might only be within a kilometer from each other, instead of each one of them connecting and taking up a slot, a frequency slot in the Starlink satellite that's within range, that they could mesh together at the actual receiver level, not the router, but the receiver portion itself, mesh together intelligently, and then intelligently share the bandwidth, again through a backhaul network, and then down to the routers, sharing SSIDs for the entire community. So no matter where you go within that community, you might leave your house and go down to the coffee shop that also has a Starlink, but you're still connected to the SSID you were in your RV, your house, your whatever. So yeah, well, Elon, I doubt you'll ever listen to this, but if it sounds like a good idea, I'd be more than willing to discuss it with you. So that's about it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this now. Peace out. Have a good night, and I probably won't be back in tonight, but I'll probably be back in here in the next day or so. So bye bye.